Okay, I think we're going to get started in just a minute. Thank you, everyone, for coming here this evening to listen to Brian Moran talk about hyperincarceration and its implications in Connecticut. He'll be introduced by Bill Fox in just a few moments. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone to please silence or turn off your cell phones. Also, please remember the bathrooms are a left out the door and another left down the hall. You may have also noticed on the website it said that this program ends at 8 p.m. That was a typo. We are wrapping up closer to 7:30 this evening, just so you know. It is an hour and a half long program approximately. Sorry about that. Please give Brian and Bill a warm welcome.
Thank you. We appreciate all of you turning out tonight to learn about our book, The Justice Imperative, and the issues surrounding criminal justice here in Connecticut and around the U.S. at large. I want to share with you how the book came to be written and also to introduce Brian, who's been our lead writer. Brian will provide an overview of the key issues that we address in the book, and then we'll open it up for questions, hopefully finishing by 7:30 or so. So the book was published in September 2014 by Malta Justice Initiative, which is committed to helping the incarcerated and advocating for criminal justice reform. Malta Justice Initiative was started by John Santa about 20 years ago and is affiliated with the Order of Malta, which is a lay religious order that began in the 11th century. It's one of the oldest institutions in the world and provides charitable works to over 120 countries. I got involved in Malta Justice Initiative about 10 years ago, and what was surprising for me to learn was how uninformed most people were about the basic issues surrounding criminal justice in Connecticut and elsewhere, and how the U.S. goes about incarcerating people, and how the system was so costly, but yet by so many measures was a failure. Some of the stats are really just overwhelming. For example, the U.S. has more people in jail per capita than any country in the world, 2.2 million in 2013. That was the high point. The U.S. has the longest sentences and the largest number of criminal offenses than any country. The U.S. spends more than any country per capita per year. In Connecticut, it's $50,000 a year on average, and yet has the highest rate of recidivism than any country. In Connecticut, 50% of people return to prison in 3 years. More disturbing was the fact that the social technology exists to deal with the many issues that felons have. So with that, the seed to write this book was planted, and we wanted to do three things. Explain how we got to where we are over the last 50 years. Secondly, to explain why it is in everyone's best interest to reform the system. And third, to put forth reform measures for Connecticut that have been successful in other states and countries. It was such a big technical subject area that we knew we needed a lot of technical expertise if the book was to be credible. So we came up with the notion of having an editorial board whose members would contribute key input in their area of expertise. So the board grew to 32 people, included law and college professors, judges, social service agency executives, the state's chief public defender, the #1 quoted economist in the state, businessmen, of course, a number of lawyers. So the editorial board began this process of writing each of these sections in the table of contents, each with their own writing style and sense of proportion. Brian's challenge was to take all of this information and make it into one seamless garment with one voice and style that could be readable by the average person. We think you'll agree he did a very good job in doing this. The book is informative, yet readable, and 3.5 years after its publication, it proves to be very prescient and still accurate. Brian also took the lead last year in developing the first ever statewide survey about practices and attitudes towards hiring formerly incarcerated people and how to improve the outcome. The survey was underwritten by the Tao Foundation, which is headquartered here in New Canaan, and was administered by Harris Polling. We have copies of the book available in the back, along with the executive summary of the survey. And I'd just like to leave you with that Brian has lived in New Canaan for over 30 years with his wife, Mary, who's here with us. They have 3 grown children. Brian is a partner in the law firm of Robinson & Cole in Stamford. He's a litigator, specializing in antitrust, intellectual property, licensing, and other commercial disputes. He's published 2 other books and was the founder of the Success Foundation, which has run summer study programs for low-income students with college potential. Brian is a director of the Malta Justice Initiative and the Inner City Foundation, and is a member of St. Aloysius Parish. Join me in welcoming Brian.
So the book, which is entitled The Justice Imperative, How Hyperincarceration Hijacked the American Dream, uses the term hyperincarceration rather than mass incarceration. Most people who deal with this issue talk about mass incarceration. So why do we use the term hyperincarceration? Well, I'm looking out over our audience, and except for these young gentlemen over here, one in the back, most of you probably remember what it was like in the 1970s and 1980s when it came to crime in the U.S., particularly in the city, New York City and other cities. We had a serious crime problem. So it's interesting, when I've gone out and I've talked to like student groups at universities, I asked them how many have been the victim of a robbery or a physical crime like that. And you're lucky if you get 1 or 2 hands in a room of 100 people raise their hand. So I'm going to ask you, because you're more my generation, how many people have been robbed or been a victim of that kind of a crime? Okay. So we had a far different experience than our kids when it comes to this. So the need to crack down on crime and the drug epidemic that hit in the 1980s with crack, particularly in the inner cities, led to this war on crime and war on drugs. And it was a serious problem. I think it was an appropriate response to try to get those serious criminals, particularly violent people, off the streets and into prison. And so this battle of trying to deal with that took the form of some pretty draconian sentencing laws, mandatory minimum sentences, indeterminate sentences that would take away from judges the discretion in particular cases to look at whether it really was a violent crime, whether this person had, what their family situation was, what their criminal history was, should they be subject to these long-term mandatory sentences or not. That kind of discretion fell by the wayside. So what happened was, if you look at the growth in the prison population from 1980 to the end of early 2000s, it went from 300,000 in the U.S. to 2.3 million. So it's a 7-fold or more hike. If you look at it on the graph, it's a hockey stick kind of graph. And the same thing happened in Connecticut. It was the same kind of proportion of increase in Connecticut. But again, it was understandable because if I think back to the 70s and 80s, I recall the movie. Anybody remember the movie Death Wish with Charles Bronson? So they made that movie, the first one, in 1974, on a budget of $3 million. It ended up grossing for Paramount $22 million. And the audiences who went to that movie actually would cheer, and some stand up and cheer every time he blew away one of these villains in the movie. And so Hollywood knew they had a good thing going, so they actually made 4 sequels from 1974 to 1994. And in each one, I think Paul Kersey, who was Charles Bronson, upped his ante in terms of the gun that he would use. So he ended up in the fifth one with the .44 Magnum, Dirty Harry's choice of weapon. But they stopped making them in 1994, and it wasn't only because at that point Charles Bronson was 71 years old. It was because they had run their course. And it's a little ironic because actually in the 1990s, early 90s, what happened was the crime rate started to go down, and it continued down throughout the 90s. And drug usage started to go down in the early 90s. Yet the war on crime and the war on drugs, the government doubled down on that war throughout the 90s. And this was a war fought by Democrats and Republicans alike with equal vigor. Some of the more harsh sentencing laws came in under Bill Clinton, including the three strikes laws. So even though crime is coming down, drug usage is coming down, most of the harsher sentencing laws were enacted in the 1990s. The other thing that happened in the 1990s is this became a pretty big industry in the US. So there was a new prison built in the United States throughout the 1990s every 2 weeks. It's pretty amazing. And so you get to this point in the early 2000s where the US has 4.6% of the world's population and 22.4% of its inmates. It's really out of whack. And you can say, well, did we still have all these violent people out there? Did we need to do this? What fueled the real spike in the hockey stick was not the hardened criminals, not the really violent people, but drug users. And very often the case was that they were nonviolent drug users. There's statistics in Connecticut from 2012 in terms of federal drug crimes and federal arrests, which suggest that only 10% of those people used a weapon in connection with the crime for which they were convicted, and about 20 to maybe 30% of them had a serious criminal record in their past. So that means the vast majority are users, nonviolent users without a serious drug past. Yet the 80% of the arrests that were made in this country in the 1990s for drugs was for marijuana use. So, now you've seen where it's legal in a growing number of states. So that's why we say, hyperincarceration. So did this work in terms of reducing the crime rate? Connecticut is, the crime rate today is the lowest it's been since 1969, lowest in 40 years. So in that sense, you could say, well, put them in jail, throw away the key has worked. But as I said, we're putting in people who are nonviolent. And the other thing that studies suggest that in the early part of the war on crime, you could equate, I think, a 10% increase in incarceration with about a 2% reduction in the crime rate. It was that kind of correlation. But then at some point, you reached a point of diminishing returns, and they weren't getting those kinds of results. So we're doing this, and we're doing it, it's not cheap. So I equate our prison system to, does anybody, because we have an older crowd here, remember the 1985 Hugo, the car that came from Yugoslavia? This is going to be the cheap alternative to expensive American cars. And was among the standard features that was advertised for the Yugo was carpet. Great. And they had a rear window defogger, the principal purpose of which was to keep your hands warm when you pushed the car to the repair station. It was voted by Car Talk magazine as the worst car in the millennium. So, we have this Hugo system, but at a Lamborghini price. So in the state of Connecticut, we spend about between $1 and $2 billion on a correction system. That's on a budget of $20 billion. So it's 5 to 10% of our state budget. And 1 in 8 state employees are corrections officers. Connecticut, as I think Bill said, the average cost per bed, per inmate, per year is $51,000. That's the third highest in the nation because nothing in Connecticut comes cheap, right? So we're spending all this money, and so, what kind of results are we getting for our bang for our buck? And that's why I say it's like a Hugo, because the recidivism rate, that is that rate at which people who are released end up back in prison within 3 years, in Connecticut was about 2 out of every 3 for a long time, which the national average is 43%. Not that the national average is anything to brag about. There's some states that are down in the 20s, like Oregon. So we have this revolving door system, and not only are they sort of going in, they're not coming out any better when they went in, because 8 to 9 people in prison have a addiction problem, drug or alcohol, or a mental health issue. And by and large, throughout this period of time, they were not being treated for those addictions, and their mental health problems weren't addressed while they were in prison. So they're coming out, and the other thing we did, it's not enough that we punish these people and put them in prison, but when they come out, we figure, well, let's really punish them, because we're going to impose on them all these collateral restraints. Things like they no longer qualify for public housing. They no longer qualify for Pell Grants. They can lose their right to welfare benefits, and they cannot qualify for certain licenses, like a barber's license. Why a barber's license? I don't know, but a barber's license. So the idea that this would be like if you get your Yugo out of the repair shop, and now you're told you can't go on any public bridges, tunnels, can't use any public parking spaces, but good luck. So, these people are coming out, and I got to ask you, these people are coming out, who do you want walking out those prison gates? Do you want somebody who's been treated for their drug addictions? Do you want somebody who's been treated for their mental health problems? Do you want somebody who's gotten some amount of training? Do you want somebody who has a place to go in terms of a home? Do you want somebody who has a job to go to? If it was you or I and we came out under those set of circumstances, I can't say that I would make it on the outside. Yet ostensibly the theory is, they should be rehabilitated and they should be reintegrated back into society. But we've created all these barriers. So, as I said, and a lot of these people are nonviolent people. I think most people would say that they deserve a second chance. And the other cost of this, apart from just the sheer dollars, is the impact that it has on our inner cities, and particularly minorities. And some of the statistics are almost mind-boggling, the impact of this on that segment of our population. For example, there was an article in the New York Times in April of last year, I think, that said that among the black population in the prime of your life, so from 24 to 55, there are only 83 men for every 100 women in the country. And they attribute that to death and incarceration. In Ferguson, Missouri, which we're all familiar with, that statistic is 60 black men for every 100 women. You can think what would happen to New Canaan if tomorrow there were only 6 men for every 10 women. What impact that would have on the economy, individual families, kids. It would be pretty devastating. So this impact that it has on the inner cities by virtue of the sheer numbers of people, and it is astounding how many people we're talking about here. In the United States, there are 70 million adults walking around with criminal records. That's a big number. And so once you get saddled with a criminal record, your ability to get a job, Connecticut has now banned the box, which means you can't ask about their criminal record in the initial application process, but you can after the fact do a criminal check. Most people do. Our survey, by the way, was directed to employers. The survey that we did, and we find that most of them do these background checks as a matter of course. So, you know, it's really difficult. And I'll share with you some other statistics that I think really kind of drive this point home. And that is that it's estimated, this is a 2009 study, that the poverty rate in this country would have declined by 10% between 1980 and 2004, but for mass incarceration. That's, you know, I read that and I fell over. And then it's estimated that more than one in every, I'm sorry, get it here. One in three black males in the U.S. will at some point in their lives serve time in prison if the current trend continues. That was an estimate. In some U.S. cities, think about D.C., Baltimore, more than half of young adult males are currently under correctional supervision. In Connecticut, blacks and Hispanics make up 24% of our population, but 66% of our inmates. So these kinds of impact is pretty profound. And so what kind of reforms are we talking about here? What we'd like to see is the right sizing of our prison system. You know, get out the nonviolent, get out the drug offenders. They don't need to go to prison. There are all kinds of alternatives to that, including treatment. They don't have to go to prison. It's estimated that probation is 1/10 the cost of incarceration. Supervised release and treatment is 1/3 the cost of incarceration. And so a lot of these people just don't need to be going to prison in order to get help. It's a recognition of these people. A lot of these people are sick rather than necessarily worthy of prison. And if you look at Germany, they have a far different approach. In the U.S., for every 100,000 people, there are 750 inmates. In Germany, it's 90 people. Is that order of magnitude? When you talk to German correction officials and ask them, where do you keep your mental health cases? They say, we don't put them in prisons. We send them to mental health hospitals. I've gone on tours of Garner prison here in Connecticut, which is Newtown. That's where we house the prisoners with mental health issues. You know, we have this dearth of mental health facilities in Connecticut. Across the street from Gardner, there was a mental health hospital that got closed. So what we do with these people is we put them in prison. And when you go to Garner, it's a little eerie, and you can go up there and you can ask for a tour. It's real quiet, you know, and the guards don't have guns. Everything's kind of a sense of total control, and it's quiet. And what they do with these prisoners, they're actually in a single cell for 23 hours out of 24 hours until they kind of figure out, you know, where to place them, what to do with them. You know, my view is, you know, if they didn't have mental health issues before they went in, they're going to have them now, right? Being incarcerated that way. So, you know, there's a need to address, you know, those mental health issues. It's a real problem. And when you think about Newtown, you think about that terrible school shooting. And part of the problem was that kid had nowhere to be treated. I think the parents were getting ready to send him to the West Coast to put him in a facility out there. And there was a 60 Minutes story a couple of years ago about kids with mental health problems having to go to the emergency room at Yale New Haven. You know, and they couldn't keep them. They're not set up to do that. So, you know, they might give them some drugs and put them out the door. So, you know, there's a need for our society to get serious about this. But through these different methods of probation, alternative treatments, you can affect certain results. And other states have been dramatically successful in that regard, and I'll share a few statistics on that. So, Texas is a good example. In 2009, Texas was faced with a need for an additional 17,000 prison beds. So they were looking at a cost of about $2 billion to build 3 new prisons. So they kind of took a time out, thought about it, and they instead invested $241 million in treatment programs, expanded probation, and what they found was crime rates fell, recidivism fell 25%, parole revocations fell 49%. In 2 years, the prison population declined by 9,000, saving $443 million. They ended up closing 3 prisons. Pretty impactful, right? We're all taxpayers, right? The Connecticut, as I said, it's a big portion of our state budget. In Michigan, they were able to reduce their prison population by 12%. They cut recidivism by 50% to 33%. They closed 21 facilities. They cut costs by 12%. Crime went down. They also, and this is, I think, a lesson for Connecticut, they retrained 3,200 corrections officers to get them involved in the rehabilitation side of things, working with the prisoners to try to help them get better. So you don't have to get rid of all your union employees. It's a tough thing to do in a democratic state, right? And anecdotally, a lot of these corrections officers said they had a much more fulfilling job experience. They felt better about themselves, that they were doing some positive good in all of this. So it is possible. New York City, you can say, well, it has to do with the gentrification in New York City, but under Bloomberg, inmate population fell 33%, major felonies plummeted 32%. So, it is possible. So we did this book. We made the rounds around the state talking to people. We had a legislative breakfast. Every state legislator got a copy of the book. I think a lot of them actually read the book, if you can believe it. And Connecticut passed this Second Chance Act, and they're headed in the right direction. And they have a very progressive commissioner now in charge of the Department of Corrections, Scott Semple. And one of the things they've done is they've closed one facility and they've made it a transitional facility for youth to try to get them geared up to get back and reintegrated into society, giving them the proper training. So we went through this, and we were at it kind of a year talking and promoting our cause, and we really started to think about, what you could do a lot, but what really would be a game changer? What do you really need to do? And we kept coming back to jobs, because if you know how expensive it is to live around here, and if you don't have a job, I don't know how you can make a go of it, right? So we decided to do this employer survey. The employer survey was designed to understand what the practices were of employers in the state, what their attitudes were, and what kinds of incentives might be created to prompt them to give due consideration to ex-offenders and perhaps hire them. And so we did that study, and one of the other reasons we wanted to do it, I'll share a few more statistics with you. I'm a lawyer, so I love statistics. So I'm probably overwhelming you with statistics, but they do tell a big story. So so one of the things is that studies have shown that 60% of ex-offenders who get out of prison 1 year later do not have a job. And it comes at a huge cost to the country. It's estimated there are, in 2008, there were about 6 million ex-prisoners, about 14 million ex-offenders. Ex-offenders being ones who, while they didn't go to prison, they have a criminal record. And that number of people equates to about 1/10 of a percentage point drop in the overall unemployment rate. And it's also estimated that the economy loses up to $65 billion annually because of the inability of ex-offenders to get a job. But another study said that if you can get an ex-offender who has a job, and he has it throughout his period of supervised release, 93% of those people do not return to prison. So that's the secret sauce, we think. So we did the survey, and we found some interesting things. One is that 1 in 4 employers state they have a policy not to hire ex-offenders, just flat out will not hire them. 6 in 10 employers believe that an applicant with a past record of drug possession is too risky to hire. So we'd ask the question, we won't just accept that, we'd ask a kind of a pointed question. 63% believe that those who have been drug-free and crime-free for at least 3 years should be eligible to be hired. And the other thing is, overwhelmingly, 97% believe that ex-offenders and people with criminal records should be given a second chance. 96% believe that it would be great if they could be turned in from a ward of the state into a productive tax-paying citizen, but they're really hesitant. Part of it is liability, their exposure for negligent hiring and negligent supervision. So a lot of their, the other thing that was interesting, that over half of them stated they have specific jobs for which they have trouble finding qualified applicants. And then 3 of the 4, 75%, said they would hire a person with a criminal record if they were qualified to perform that job that they had trouble fulfilling, notwithstanding that they had a criminal history. So part of that suggests that, in terms of this $51,000 that we're spending per year for these people, that we ought to get smarter with how we spend our prison buck in terms of vocational training. We ought to try to match the vocational training to the demands in the marketplace. So when we first looked at the kind of sized up the Connecticut system, they had about 18,000 prisoners. I should say 74% of prisoners don't have a GED. So they had about 16,000 in the year that we looked at where they gave GED training, but only 3.4% of those actually saw it all the way through and got a certificate, right? That's a failed program. Same thing, comparable statistics when it came to vocational training. They didn't have as many in vocational training, but the percentage that actually got a certificate is only 20%. So, I mean, you just got to get smarter about this. And I think Connecticut is on their way to doing that, thankfully. The other thing, to share with you is that Connecticut has now about 15,000 prisoners annually. But again, it's kind of a revolving door. And at one point, it got well up over 20,000. But there are about 10,000 people released from Connecticut prisons every year. It's about 30 a day. So again, you should care like who's coming out those doors. Are they a threat to public safety? Have they been, their addictions been treated? Have they had their mental health problems redressed? And mental health is a big issue. I think it's estimated that, I have some statistics on New York City that are kind of scary too. Let me see if we can find those. Just the magnitude of the problem. Let's see. Thought I had it here. But it's like 1 out of 40 people in New York City has a serious mental health disorder. And New York's trying to deal with that and spend some money at it. But again, there's a solution here. And this is one of the few issues, I think, where you have consensus, maybe the only issue in the country, consensus on the far right and the far left to try to do this and try to get some change, right-size our prisons, bring down the cost, and improve the lot of these ex-offenders. In fact, after we did the survey, this week we got a call from the Charles Koch Institute who had seen our study, they liked the survey, they thought it was very effective, and they wanted to do a national employer survey. It was something actually we were hoping would happen. I mean, we didn't have the money to do it. We were hoping, because it really was a kind of a first of its kind, and it was long overdue, that it might trigger this. So we were really thrilled, and we're actually going to be going down and talking to them in Washington, D.C., helping them construct their survey, and they're particularly interested in how we were able to get employers to fill out the survey, because we had a choice when we drafted it, and we were working with Harris Polling. They know their business. They say if you do a 5-minute survey, you can expect to get, a decent level of responses. It's still a low percentage. And we had a 15-minute survey that we wanted to do. But we wanted to do a deep dive. We really wanted to ask a number of questions that would really capture, as I said, the attitudes and the practices, but more importantly, what things might make a difference. And so what we found, and we ended up doing the 15-minute one, and we ended up getting 300 responses, which was a credible response and met the sort of scientific threshold from a sampling standpoint. But things like tax incentives, subsidies for salary or health care costs. Because again, if we don't do this, we're spending $51,000 on these people a year. So if you just invest a portion of that towards these other things, you're going to drive a better outcome. It's like anything, if you want to do something, whatever you come up with in terms of strategy should be outcome driven, right? You want these people to be in that 93% who hang on to a job for the first 2 years out, and then they're home free, right? And you're taking a mother or a father and giving them back to their families, because there's statistics on the vast majority of women who are in prison are mothers of small children, and many of these women are victims themselves. You think of them as perpetrators of crime, but they're the victims of domestic abuse, physical abuse, and all and the impact of the incarceration on kids is enormous. So this whole mass incarceration fuels the cycle of poverty and the cycle of dependence, the academic achievement gap. So anything you can do to mitigate that is well worth doing. So these kinds of incentives, and they really want immunity from lawsuits. And so we ended up, based on the survey, coming up with a model act. So we have this model piece of legislation which is very pro-employer, but there's nothing wrong with that, because it actually, I think, will get the job done and affect some great results. So I thank you for listening. We have copies of the book in the back. You're free to take one. We have copies of an executive summary of the survey. You're free to take that, and we'll open it up for questions.
How much publicity have the Texas and Michigan stories gotten?
Within the criminal justice community and the corrections community, I would say they've gotten well publicized. The problem is that it doesn't seem to get beyond that community. And when Bill says, one of the things he was surprised by, and one of the reasons that the Malta Justice Initiative wanted to do the book, was that the public is largely uninformed. And it's not because the public isn't necessarily interested. It's just, the media, it wasn't a sexy story for a long time. And politicians, if you were running for office between 1980 and 2012, 13, you didn't want to be viewed as soft on crime. It was kind of an orphaned issue, right? And it didn't really have a proponent to drive it. But at a certain level, you look at the amount of money that's being spent and the results that are being obtained, and it's really ridiculous.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, 60 Minutes also did it sometime in the last couple of years. I saw a segment on the German experiment.
Yeah.
And that probably got a lot of people watch 60 Minutes. I'm just wondering if something similar could be done with respect to Texas and Michigan. If those
I'm sure it could be. And Scott Semple, who's and I think Governor Malloy, both went over to Germany and toured those prisons, as have a number of state governors and corrections. And it's just, they go over there and they tell you, it's like a hotel. It's like staying in a nice hotel, you know. And it embraces people. And again, it's treating them for their problems and trying to make them better. It's viewed more as a public health issue than a, you know. And again, I mean, violent people, there are a lot of scary people, right? I mean, there are a lot of dangerous people. And those are the people that we ought to be using prison for, really. I mean, that's a good use of our money in my mind.
I can think of a couple of questions.
Okay.
So if everybody else doesn't have one, I can think of one. Do you notice a difference between like mom and pop or self-owned companies versus corporations in responding
Yeah.
to your survey?
That's a good question, because I think the mom and pops of the world are probably more willing than, say you're a hotel chain. Now, you know, do you hire them or do you not to clean up rooms? Now, I had one hotel operator tell me, yeah, we do hire some people. We don't let anybody know because we don't want them to know, because they may choose some other hotel over us, right? That's a tough thing. I talked to another hotel chain and they don't hire. They have a policy, we're not hiring. So I think, you know, the corporate, we had a meeting Wednesday. We went in to talk to, the Business Council of Fairfield County is the big sort of trade organization in our woods here. We presented the results of our survey to them, to their HR directors. And, you know, they listen and they're sympathetic, but, you know, they're all about risk averse. They're risk averse. They don't, and I'm a corporate lawyer, so I tell them, I get it. You know, I advise my clients to minimize their risks. They have a duty to their shareholders, which is why I think it's so important to listen to these people, right? Find out what their concerns are and try to address them. And if it's consistent with public policy, why should they, if they do this and they hire somebody, why should they be on the hook if that person then, you know, goes off the farm and does something bad? Why should they be a victim of a lawsuit for negligent hiring and negligent supervision? I don't think they should be. And so when we did this Model Act, one of the things we specifically tried to do was not only create incentives for the employers, but we tried to create motivations for the offenders in the act, so that, you know, it takes two, right? There's the employer and this employee, and the employee's got to make a serious life decision that they're going to make this happen. They're going to change their lives, right? So we have motivations in there, like if you stay clean and out of trouble for 3 years, you can get your record expunged. If you stay clean and you're out of trouble, you can get a state certificate that says you've done that. You get a state certificate that you've gone through this program or that vocational training program. So you know, it's got to be both ways. And when we talked about this at the Business Council meeting with the HR directors, we had somebody there who was involved with reentry and trying to help employees get ready. And he was imploring them just to hire one, you know, each company, hire one. He says, we really vet them and we want to make sure that they're ready and screen them, and not everybody's ready. It's tough, but then I hear success stories. You know, I meet people and they've turned their life around, and it's great. Yeah.
But the communities all know about these young people. And it's been incredibly successful.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of that. That's what, yeah.
The people that are in the community, in the halfway house, they have the opportunity to go back and work with people that are just entering agency and making their transitions to be out of drug use. So that there are two things that happen. So when they go in the community, they also know about founding, you know, little organizations where people with drugs can come to help, you know, give up their drugs.
Yeah.
And it's very positive. Then it's not going to incredibly positive.
Yeah. I agree with that. You know, the problem is there aren't enough of those facilities.
Has anybody thought that this might be an implementation?
There, yeah. Yeah, there's actually a program called Housing First that's getting a lot of traction because they view the biggest problem is, you know, somebody comes up, they have nowhere to go. And it's sort of,
They also don't have any,
yeah, and they can't even, it's interesting that, you know, this public housing, a lot of people are dependent on public housing, but the rules on that are extraordinary. So if say you got some kid, he gets out and he goes to live with his grandma in public housing. If he commits any kind of crime, not even within the housing, but if he's living there under a roof, not only does he end up going back, she loses her right to public housing. I mean, and then there's the 3 strikes, you're out notion. You know, I always thought that meant, you know, 3 different incidents, 3 different crimes, you know, you got 3 chances. Any incident, you get charged with multiple crimes every time. You know, the prosecutors are creative. They have a whole series of crimes, and they try to get you to plead out to a lesser crime, and those count. Those are 3 crimes. That's the 3 strikes. You know, the policy was just so heavily weighted in terms of, you know, locking the door and throwing away the key that we were like the Energizer Bunny. We just couldn't stop. We kept going and going and going, and we created this situation.
You know, 40% of our population has only 0.3% of the wealth. Right? And that means they really don't have any way to create work for themselves. And so that means that employers have a national resource, they have a kind of, you know, collective monopoly over it, right? That 40% of this country is in desperate need of. So why shouldn't there be some law requiring employers to employ some certain percentage of people, you know, in their workforce, some
Yeah.
certain percentage of people who have been in prison or who are in that bottom 40%
Yeah.
or something like that as a safety measure for the society as a whole. I mean, there's no other developed country that tolerates the extremes of wealth and poverty. Our country has.
Yeah, and it's scary how poor people are in this country. So I'll take the state of Connecticut. I have some statistics on that as well. So there's something called the Alice study. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but you know, there's a poverty level, and the poverty level is, you know, $12,000 a year, $24,000 for a family of 4. How many people think you can live on that in Connecticut? So there are 10% of people in Connecticut living below the poverty level. The extreme poverty level, because as if that's not low enough, is $6,000 per individual and $12,000 for a family of 4. And in the U.S., 10% of blacks and 12% of Hispanics are living in extreme poverty. The Alice study is an attempt to get a more realistic poverty level for the state of Connecticut. And even this, I don't think, does it. It's $22,000 for an individual and $65,000 for a family of 4. But in Connecticut, 35% of the people are below that level. So, and 51% of the jobs in Connecticut pay less than $20 an hour. So do the math, it's $40,000. It's below, by $25,000, the Alice level. There's 7.1 million children in the U.S. living in deep poverty. And then there's a statistic, and this is another mind-boggling one. The number of households living on $2 or less per person per day in a given month. There's 1.65 million people in the U.S. in 2011. It's just, I mean, you hit on a very important point, right?
Why shouldn't that be a mandate for legally requiring something?
Well, you know, because, you know, the U.S., you know, is a country built on sort of liberties, right? And the idea of taking away choices from employers, I'd rather see it done. Listen, we did the survey of employers, right? You can't do what won't work. You should do what works. If you can get them inside the tent and thinking with you and behind you through incentives. Like I said, our survey suggests that, you know, underwriting salary and healthcare costs, underwriting training, providing tax incentives, all of that is, particularly if you give them immunity, it can drive results and get some jobs. I mean, we certainly do it with veterans, right?
Yes.
Okay, probably don't do, I mean, I'll tell you, we don't do enough for veterans, but we do have these programs where you have tax incentives for hiring veterans. And what we're suggesting is you ought to be doing the same thing for this not insignificant portion of our population.
And poll after poll, that the preferences, the political preferences that the top 1% has are in extreme opposition to the rest of the country. And so by saying, well, you have to get something that that 1% approves of, you're saying, well, we're going to get something that they want rather than something that the vast majority of the country desperately needs. And so you're basically, it's giving in to plutocracy without asking where their money is coming from, why they have it instead of the rest of us.
Well, that's a big issue. But I will say, I think you ought to take some solace in the fact that the extreme right is behind this issue. And this Charles Koch institution is putting their money behind this. So, you know, and again, I defy somebody to name another issue in the country where you have this kind of agreement on these polar opposites, political polar opposites. So, you know, with enough education and getting the word out, I think we can get the will of not just the people, but the powers that be to actually do something about this. And when you look at the impact on particularly our inner cities, you know, I feel kind of compelled to try to do something there.
We have the highest per capita income in the country in Connecticut, and we have the 4th highest difference between the rich and the poor.
Yeah.
So there is no state in the country that has more capacity to reduce the inequality of wealth and income and of legal status because of that. We make no effort.
We'll give this young man to your right a chance.
I came in late, so I don't know if you touched on this, but I had a generic question related to the racial impact of the enforcement of drug laws. My understanding being that the percentage of people who use illicit drugs or sell illicit drugs is pretty much the same across all the major ethnic groups. So you have the same percentage of whites, blacks, or Hispanics either using or selling drugs, and that percentage I've heard is somewhere in the range of 7%, which would lead you to think that if you looked at the jail population, you'd expect 4 to 5 times as many white prisoners as black prisoners in jail for using illicit drugs, when the data seems to be exactly in the opposite direction, that 4 or 5 times as many black prisoners as white prisoners in there for drug offenses, which begins to suggest a disproportionate targeting of the black community, all of which I understand led this law professor at Stanford some years ago, and I thought he migrated to a law school in Ohio to write a book entitled The New Jim Crow, the thesis of which was that the war on drugs had the effect, if not the purpose, but at least the effect of reinstituting a racial caste system, her theory being that the war on drugs overwhelmed the law enforcement capabilities that existed. They couldn't go out and arrest 25 million people. Therefore, they had discretion, and they used the discretion against the black community rather than the white community. And translating that to Connecticut, I don't know if what you've experienced, if you were to look at the city of New Haven, for example, or the state, the local, and private law enforcement looking in the black neighborhood or looking on the Yale campus, or if you went to Hartford, you know, were they looking in the black neighborhood or perhaps on the campus of Trinity College, where, if you talk with parents, drugs run rampant. So I didn't know whether you'd run into that or commented on this.
Yeah, well, Dick mentions this book, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and we acknowledge the book in our book. It is a book that I would recommend to everybody here. I think when all is said and done, it will be viewed as one of the most influential books written this millennium. it's really that good in terms of the quality of the research and the scholarship to it and its message. You know, the other thing you don't mention, but I think it's a big factor in that, is the ability when you get arrested to defend yourself, right? Our kids get arrested and they, you know, unless you just throw your kid on the bus, you're probably gonna get them a lawyer, right? And having effective counsel, you know, it makes a big difference, you know, whereas a lot of these kids who get arrested who don't have means, you know, they're in a situation where, and I don't mean to cast aspersions of public defenders, but, you know, you have these opportunities to do deals, and you do deals, and then you got a criminal record, and, you know, there you go. So anyway, that's part of it. So, you know, is there targeting? You know, it's, I'm not a criminal lawyer, so I don't have like firsthand knowledge, but I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, all that contributed to it. I mentioned earlier that blacks and Hispanics are 24% of the Connecticut population, but 66% of the prison population, so that tells you something, right?
Do we have any privatization of the jails here?
No, not here.
No.
A lot of states they do. It's big
And
business.
One last question. I think this is such an exciting thing. I'm so glad, I'm so shocked that Canaan would have such a lecture here, so I'm thrilled. But Jeff Sessions seems to be backpedaling horribly.
Does that surprise you?
It's just a tremendous disappointment in this day and age.
You know,
Throw him all in jail. Just,
you can take the boy out of Alabama, but you can't take the Alabama out of the boy. I don't know. Yeah.
Is there any help that exists for people
You know, there's a lot of there's some nonprofit groups, you know, reentry groups that are in Connecticut. They're fairly active. A lot of them are dependent on state dollars. That money is not there. I mean, the cutbacks for nonprofits who are getting money from the state of Connecticut, same way New Canaan got hit. You know, we used to get $5 million for our high schools. They took, I thought they should have left us a nickel or a dollar, you know, but they took it all, right? Same thing's happening across the state. So it's really a tough nut. A lot of these organizations are struggling, but they're out there. They're doing this battle every day. They're out trying to help these people. And I will say there's one guy on our board, and he is an ex-offender, and he's a good example because Darryl was in prison, and he started reading in prison and educating himself. And at one point, he just made up his mind, which is why I think you have to come to this point if you're an ex-offender where you just decide you're going to change your life. And he decided he's going to change his life. And he wrote down on a piece of paper that he was going to get out. He was going to get a college degree. He was going to get a master's degree. He was going to own a home. 5-year plan. You know, and he was due to get released like in another year or two. And while he was on our board, he came to me and said, we just bought the house. I said, the kids must be real proud of you. He said, oh, they were happy as a clam because, you know, they want to know where the pool was. Oh, that's all they. But he got his master's and he got his college degree, and now he started a halfway house called Friendship House up in New London, where he's trying to do for others what, you know, and so you hear that kind of a story, and you're just so inspired. So, you know, it's like these numbers are crushing. Like, there's so many people, but, you know, when you get down to, you know, the ground level, you know, there's a concept called subsidiarity, you know, trying to do things on a very local level. And if you change one person's life, I mean, you're enriched. But, you know, the numbers are so staggering here. And the impact, you know, when 1 in 3 black males is, you know, likely to spend time in prison, I mean, that's, as a country, that's, and, you know, is some of the onus on these communities, you know, and these individuals? You know, yes. I mean, I'm a guy who believes in accountability and responsibility. I don't think you can have just a handout. You got to have a hand up. But, you know, so one of the things that Dick Troy was here is he was able to initiate a correspondence that I had with Justice Scalia about the book. And Justice Scalia read the book, and we kind of went back and forth, debated certain points. But, you know, he ended up saying, you know, if you think these reformative changes or the fact that there are fewer black men for so many black women is going to make a difference in the inner cities, you're going to be sorely disappointed. And he pointed to the disintegration of the black family as something that is the biggest problem, something that government can aggravate but can't solve. You know, I mean, I get it in a way, but you can't, I don't think you can stop trying. And as a nation, I don't think you can stop trying to do the right thing. And the smart thing, because you can actually do it and save money.